it's a different truck. My trucks all seem to know how to get here. Really a privilege and an honor to be speaking in front of everybody tonight. And to be honest, really humbling. I recently talked to Tilke, and he's like, "You got to come up and people would love to hear you talk." And I said, what am I going to say at this point? I'm surrounded by a room of experts. You all have more time on the water in more recent days, and there's a lot of really talented guys that are doing some really great discoveries out there and getting really great results. And I look around and I see the experts of the bay in this room. I feel like I've probably forgotten more than I remember about anything I've done out there. It's been about 9 years since I've put a boat in the water. Actually, a buddy of mine twisted my arm and he's like, "Come on, take us up to Little Sturgeon." We died on the water all day. Took him out to Little Sturgeon for a day. We fished together. Saw one fish. It was a really big fish. It's the one you want to see. But I've been thinking about this. Excuse me. And I honestly don't know what I could share that would be beneficial. And I always go back to, why did I get into musky fishing? And maybe we all wonder that at one point or other too, especially at about the 10th hour. Why am I doing this? And how much my motives, my intentions, my goals. There's a real ebb and flow, and the biggest challenge, by my experience in my what I guess I would call a career of musky fishing, the biggest challenge I ever had to overcome was me at the end of the day. To be honest about it, and I say that especially I started guiding down in the southeast part of the state, Waukesha County, on the lakes down there, Okauchee, Oconomowoc, Pewaukee. And I got bit by that musky bug. I fished as a kid. I give all the credit to my mom and my dad and family members for introducing me to the outdoors, encouraging me to be outdoors. That's all they ever said. Go outside. Any and all of anything that's ever worked out really well for me in my life had less to do with me and more to do with good mentors in my life and really good support. And I'm not going to go real deep in the weeds on this, but more and more at this point in my life, I feel it's important to share, because a lot of people ask, what are you doing now? Do you fish? I don't fish, hardly at all, believe it or not. I was just sharing with Greg and Ellen. I've always kind of been an all or nothing kind of person, and I'm either all in, and it's honestly easier to as hard as it was to walk away from it and shift gears, it was easier to just stay away from it, because otherwise it's kind of like watching your old girlfriend go out to dinner with somebody else every day. I kind of gotta stay away. And as much as hunting and fishing in the outdoors are a big part of my growing up and my childhood, one of the biggest challenges that really derailed me from all the things that were near and dear to my heart was addiction. And addiction got me down a path that by the time I was 26 years old, I was on a cot at Salvation Army, hopeless, and pretty convinced that the harms and the damages I'd done to the relationships in my life, every aspect of my life, I was convinced there was no turning this around and getting it straightened out. And whenever I see the kettle ringers, I still donate money to the Salvation Army. If it wouldn't have been for them, I don't know if I'd be here today, to be honest. And I ended up getting into recovery on January 7th of 1994, and I've been clean and sober since then. And in recovery for me, one of the things that really came back with a vengeance was my desire to fish. And much to my wife's dismay, I remember there was one day she was like, "It'd be different if you were making some money at it for being out there that much." And something clicked, and I came home about a week later with a little brochure. I was like, "Check it out, I'm going to be a guide." I heard what you said. Oh, well, fast forward, I'm divorced now. And ironically, that didn't happen until after I wasn't guiding anymore. I think being gone and away kind of helped our marriage more than anything. You know, every time she turned around, there I was. And a lot of gratitude for her. Her name's Susan, and she's one of the greatest gifts in my life. And it still baffles me. You know, I never thought we'd be divorced. You know, but we are. And in conjunction to getting started in back to fishing, given my personal experience with addiction, I did a lot of work working in direct service field of helping other people with addiction or substance use issues. And when I stopped guiding, I got back into that. And today, I work for the state of Wisconsin as I'm the Harm Reduction Services Coordinator for the state. I do a lot of drug user health initiatives and strategies on a statewide level. Narcan Direct program is my main project. I oversee about 100 agencies around the state with our Narcan training and distribution efforts and activities to just try and keep people safe, healthy, and alive through risky seasons in their life. I'm sure everybody in this room probably knows someone that has suffered a fatal overdose at this point in the journey. Opioids and fentanyl are killing our communities, and I'm dedicated to doing what I can to make Wisconsin the first state to have zero overdose fatalities. And I'll stop there on that. Thank you. There's a lot of really great people who do really great work behind the scenes and work really hard for those members of our community. You know, if you know somebody who struggles with substance use, you know, as hard as it is to be understanding and compassionate, you know, just try to be understanding and compassionate. You know, that's not who they are. That addiction just gets us down a path. I wrapped up a meeting before leaving the office in Madison today, and my coworkers are like, "Oh, what are you up to tonight?" I was like, "Oh," I told them what I was going to do. They're like, "They're going to be disappointed when all you do is talk about Narcan Direct." So I'm going to stop there. The thing that I love about that job, though, equivalent to kind of like being a Muskie guide, even though I'm behind the scenes and I don't have any real frontline interaction with the community activities, every time I hear that a life was saved from that Narcan that I get to help make sure is happening, you know, like for me, it's like getting that Muskie in the net, getting those hooks out and getting a clean release and watching it swim away, you know, keeping the loved ones of our community safe, you know, so that recovery happens, you know, and there's a better life ahead of anybody who has that challenge. And I'm always available. My number's the same as it's always been. If you ever want to call and talk to me about any of that, give me a call. Back to muskie fishing. You know, like I said, I started out, you know, on those lakes, and in my desires and my aspirations to be a full-time guide really grew, and I started guiding full-time on those waters. And one of the things that was just driving me nuts was kind of that peak recreational season. You know, it's hard to make a living on a small body of water where the majority of boats are going in circles, tearing everything up. And I was recreationally fishing Green Bay. I started fishing more really for walleyes with some walleye nut friends of mine, and you know, kept hearing, you know, bits and pieces about, you know, muskies in Green Bay, you know, and you know, I was reminiscing with some good friends over here before we're talking tonight, you know, and if there was ever a greater success story about a restoration of a fishery in the history of mankind, not just the state of Wisconsin, but in the world, by my opinion, what your club has actively participated in achieving and accomplishing, you know, is one of the greatest feats, I think, in nature. To think that the the Great Lakes spotted strain muskie was really decimated and gone by the 80s. And I'll never forget going to the Milwaukee Chapter Muskies Inc. meeting one night. They were the featured speaker was Kevin Kapczynski, Green Bay biologist. You probably remember him, or know him, and probably even worked directly with him in some of the early work on getting the restoration happening here. And he was coming to talk about, you know, what was going on up here. And I sat, if he was here, I sat where you are with a notebook, and I wrote down every word that man had to say. I was intrigued. I wanted to know all I could. You know, he talked about, you know, going up to the Indian River in Michigan, you know, to get the eggs from the females and getting their own broodstock at the Wild Rose Hatchery. And then when he started talking about where they started with the reintroduction and stocking, you know, fingerlings, yearlings, you know, Fox River, Menominee River, and he was going through, you know, each year, you know, and then expanding to the tributaries. And I was just notes. Because, and then somewhere in that timeline, where, excuse me, you know, when thinking about, yeah, for me in my mind, the thought of fishing for muskies in Green Bay was like looking for a needle in a haystack. You know, it's a lot of water. even a 48-inch muskie, which is a big muskie, is a sliver in that much water. You know, where do you start? And one of the most memorable, impactful things that really started to give a perspective, it was, I want to say it was 99 or 2000 maybe, fishing a walleye tournament. It was a local walleye tournament. I was fishing with my buddy Lynn Nicklash. I was his boat beyond. Setting crawler harnesses, and a buddy of ours from Oconomowoc, Bob Lauritsen, was in an adjacent boat where everybody ran. You know, it's like, I feel like, you know, we ran forever. And I think the tournament started out of Ocono, and everybody ran down to Gano Reef. And everyone was pulling crawler harnesses over the tops of the weeds. And all of a sudden we hear Bob going, he's yelling, Dennis, look! And he's all buckled up, and here's this giant muskie flying out of the water from behind his boat. You know, muskie came up and grabbed one of those crawler harnesses, ended up snapping and biting off. But that was the first moment where I thought, you know, maybe there's a rhyme and a reason and a starting point. You know, and began and what I did for my approach was, I mean, I'd listen to anybody who would share anything they wanted to share about muskie fishing on Green Bay. But what helped me focus my energies and my efforts on where to start and how to approach it was I started looking at areas of the bay in regard to just looking at a map and finding what I would call muskie lakes, so to speak. You know, and I would draw a circle around that part of the structure, that part of the lake, that part of the system. Forget about the rest of it. And just learn a section, learn an area, and little by little, you know, began, you know, and I kept going back to those notes that I took, you know, when Kevin shared, you know, where the initial stockings were done, you know, and began breaking it down piece by piece, which was hard, you know, you know, especially from like a guide perspective, you know, there was always kind of that conflict between, first and foremost, I wanted to give my customers a quality day on the water and put them in a position to catch a fish, you know, which doesn't bode well when there's a zillion acres of water to explore, you know, and not wanting to guinea pig my customers, you know, and for me, I've always found honesty to be the best policy, you know, and people be like, well, what can we do? It's like, well, take you here, you know, this is stuff I know, or we can go to this spot there, and you're like, well, how have you done there? Never been there. But if you're willing to take a boat ride and you know, learn in the process, I'm going to work my butt off, you know, and maybe we're going to discover something cool together, you know, and time off, you know, days and time off, you know, in between trips, and little by little, began to get to explore a little more. You know, and I thought maybe threading together, you know, some of the aspects that are really just most memorable to me, and I'll never forget, like the Mike and Nikki Sharp from Okachi. We came up to the river for a half a day. We started on Okachi, and they talked me into putting the boat on the trailer and coming up for a half day. It's like, all right. And sure enough, you know, and at that point hadn't intentionally caught a muskie yet up here. We put it up by Dairy Queen. Fox Point. Thank you. We were chucking baits up and down the riprap in front of Fort Howard over here by the paper mill. And the next thing I know, you know, Nikki was getting burned out on whatever I had her throwing, because my mind was still wrapped around, well, this is what we should be throwing here. And they were big, and they were, you know, good old, you know, if you're gonna catch a muskie, this is how you gotta catch it. You gotta work your ass off, you gotta be in pain, you gotta be throwing something big. Ended up throwing on a Fire Tiger 6-inch big depth rider, and I think it was her third cast. She's like, I'm snagged. I was like, your snake is swimming the other way. You know, and it was a 44-inch muskie, you know, right just before the discharge off the riprap, you know, and it was like, yeah, that was awesome, you know. Clearly, you know, I know we've all caught bigger fish, and you know that one of the things that I regret along the way, that I lost perspective on, was how special every muskie is. You know, I got wrapped up at times into wanting to get the biggest, be the baddest, I'll admit, I wanted to be the muskie, you know, the common household name. You know, like when the word muskie came out, Dennis Radloff was synonymous with that. Stop with that.
You've got a bay name there for you, Radloff Bay.
Yeah. You know, and all that did was get me down a path at times where I missed out on the important parts and the important aspects of the journey and the process. And you know, a buddy of mine called me on the way up here. He's like, "Damn it, how come you never tell me when you're doing cool things?" He's like, "I just heard through the grapevine, you know." It's like, I would have been there. He's like, "Dude, you heard me." He's like, but then we got to talking, and I shared with him about, you know, one of the things that I'm embarrassed to admit, and I feel bad about this. I had a couple guys out. They booked at I think at the Chicago Muskie show. They came. I had them up to Sturgeon Bay for a day. During a good time of the year. It was like late June, late May, early June. That first week or two of the season, and I'm working my ass off on this waypoint from this big fish we saw just the minute before, you know, and I forget that they have tails and fins and can swim and move, you know. But I'm just dead set on working the shit out of this waypoint, you know, because it should still be there. And sure enough, he hooks into this fish, and I'm like, here we go. And as soon as it got to a point, you know, with the water being so clear, you know, I could see, you know, this wasn't the fish we were looking for. And the guy is thrilled beyond, you know, I'm like, I was like, oh, it's just a freaking pike. You know, and he's like, I was about to shake it off. Just laid it up for him. And, you know, and he's like, I want a picture of that. You know, we netted it, and it was a 44-inch pike. That's a big pike.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that's a feather in just about anybody's hat. Especially for, you know, I think anybody who's a guide, anybody who's, you know, even, you know, I think the mindset of a guide, the mindset of even just anybody who's sitting in this room tonight is a muskie enthusiast. You know, I won't say I won't generalize. I was looking for that biggest, next best, you know, like the only acceptable outcome is hauling in the biggest one at the end of the day. You know, and what I learned from him, that, you know, what was humbling, what I learned that day is, you know, like it's not about me. You know, it's about you know, especially from a guide perspective, or even if I'm not guiding, you know, the people who are on my boat, you know, it's a team outing, it's a joint venture, and you know, and what's more important is, you know, what are the goals and the perspectives, and what's important to the people that are in the boat with me at that moment. You know, and I apologized to him, but it even sunk in more so that following off season. I think it was at the Muskie show. He came up and he was flipping through the photo album for the year. He's like, "Oh my gosh!" He's like, "I can't believe you got my pike in here. I remember you were pretty pissed about that." He's like, "Oh," he's like, "I'm sorry." I was like, "That is an awesome pike, you know." It's like I'd be happy to go out and catch a 44-inch pike right now, to be honest, you know. And just some of those perspectives, you know, and getting lost in that, and where I lost traction at times was getting caught up in some of that, you know, trying to, feeling like, you know, I didn't catch as many fish as that guy did today, or I didn't get the biggest one that one got today. And when I look back at the history of the encounters with my clients, not once did they ever judge me or critique me on that, you know, they didn't have that measurement. That was me. You know, that was me getting in the way of making a good day on the water for people at times. And I'm really grateful that when, you know, like I said, I don't think any of us figured anything out solely by ourselves, you know, in one way or another. And I know I've had a lot of really great teachers, and some of my best teachers were people that hired me for the day. You know, you know, I had a guy show up in the boat one day. He's like, "What are we gonna do?" I was like, "We're gonna throw bulldogs." He's like, "Great, I love bulldogs." And he pulls out a big, it was like the glow white bulldog. And he starts casting. He's burning this thing in like a bucktail, and just about getting ready to tell him, you know, I was like, "You're gonna want to slow that down." We need to be working these deeper, you know. And he had it was before they even like sold the little tail gunner blades, you know, that everybody sticks in their eye. He had made his own, you know, and it was the first time I'd ever seen one of those. And he's burning this thing in, and I kid you not, I inhaled and was just getting ready to be like, "You need to slow that down." He's like, "Oh my gosh, look at this, look." I mean, he was burning this thing not inches under the top of the water, and we're over like 30 feet of water. Sure enough, fish came up, ate it. You know, and that was, you know, and that goes into conjunction. One of the other best things that ever happened for me along the way was the 4 years that I did the professional muskie tournament trail. And the first year I did the PMTT, I got my ass kicked. You know, and you know, I thought, we went down to Kentucky for the first event of the season, and I thought, you know, me and my buddy we'll go show these southern dicks, you know, how to fish for muskies, you know, and with bucktails and suets, and you know, we'll show them. And we got our ass kicked by a couple guys from down south who used nothing. They had nothing. And we even laughed. We stood on the balcony the one night looking into the boat. We were just like, "There's not a single muskie rod in that boat. Shakespeare ugly sticks with fire line and nothing but rattle traps." It's like, "Oh, these guys are in for a hard day." They kicked our ass. They won. You know, they beat everybody. And I got to become really good friends with them. I was like, "So tell me more about that." Fishing the PMTT taught me the importance of the willingness to be adaptable and adjustable, and to even do things you don't like. You know, it's like, at the end of the day, if you want to catch fish, it isn't about doing it, you know, doing what I enjoy as much as doing what it's going to take or require, you know, to be adaptive and do a technique that you think is corny, or a technique that you just, you know, didn't consider. You know, there were so many techniques that in my mind weren't musky techniques. You know, and I still, tons of credit and props to the diehards that I know who are really dedicated to casting this system. I mean, talk about a challenging system to put in a consistent pattern on a day-to-day basis casting. You know, and trolling was never my strong suit, but if you want to catch fish out here, especially big fish, there's a time and place. That's what it takes. That being said, the first year that I really went, I want to say it was like the fall of 2006, because I used to do a little bit of walleye fishing in August every year up around Chambers and that bite, and then I'd finish my season out back, with casting, and it was, I think, '06 was the first fall where we were really dedicated to just casting in the river, and there was a number of boats that were trolling in the river at that time. I tried trolling first, and the one thing I've always been, especially on this system out here, I always paid attention to what everybody else is doing, exactly what they're doing, and the one thing that I would say in hindsight that we stumbled into, and I can't tell you what muskies do until we have a roundtable discussion with English-speaking muskies to get directly from them. Because every time I thought I had something figured out, and I'm sure you've all done it, you catch that one in that one spot where it's like, what the hell was that fish doing there? That wasn't supposed to happen. You always have that little road experience that breaks the mold, or that shatters that what you thought was kind of locked in gold. But we did start casting, and when everybody's trolling, and they all know what they're doing, and nobody's catching fish, and the fish are there, you're like, in my mind, there's like all that trolling pressure in that direction presentation, is either shutting those fish down, or they're moving them shallow, or they're pushing out deeper. They're adjusting just as much as we're adjusting to try and get them. They're adjusting to our adjustments, and the really hot bite that we ended up getting into it was like the whole month of September and into October, was riding on the edge of the channel, casting up into no water at all, and cranking 6-inch crankbaits back to the boat as fast as we could, banging the bottom the whole way. And it was the first time in my muskie career that, not only were we catching fish every day, we were catching multiple fish a day, and I still remember the day that we had our first 10-fish day, and they were all over the board, anywhere from somewhere in the low 30s, and a lot were upper 30s, low 40s, and a lot of upper 40s, and every now and then, even a 50 here and there. But and the really cool, fun, exciting part about it at that time was that I remember a lot about that season was all the fish at that time had Floyd tags on. It was before they started pit tagging everything. They had the external Floyd tag with a little number on it. And I kept the Sharpie tucked into the side of my Lakewood box. And at the end of the year, I had, I can't remember how many Floyd tag numbers on top of my box. It was just number, date, time, location. And then I would email all those numbers into the biologist at the end of the year, and he'd share back, all the history on them. And there was one in particular that we got right off the Mason Street Bridge. Sometimes when people get divorced, they have custody battles over, the important things like children. Me in my case, it was the Harleys and a laptop of all things. And I lost the laptop that has a lot of my stuff on it. I don't know if that was just to be mean, but I still have all my handwritten stuff in a chest somewhere. I wish I would have maybe dug some of that out, but the fish we got, it was a 48-inch fish. It would have been September of '06. And what blew my mind on that fish was the growth rate on that fish over a 3-year period. And going back 3 years prior to that, it was a 44-inch fish, I want to say. It was just like the incredible growth rates out here in this system. It just always been a real next year thinking, you know, you're gonna catch lightning in a jar again and go back to that. One of the hardest things, you know, for me was the never-ending and evolving changing patterns on a year-to-year basis out here. It's like, I don't know that I ever had a back-to-back year that I could say was like a cut and paste, carbon copy, you know, pick up where you left off. It was constantly an adaptive, evolving, moving type thing, you know, because then in '07, I couldn't get that cast bite to go to save my life, you know, but then it was the troll bite out here in, you know, out in University Bay, right outside the river mouth. And then the next year, you know, it was a reef up further, and then the next year it was over on the other side. And it's not that any of the other stuff went away, but, you know, why and how, and I still wonder about that, you know, how could a pattern so established and so set that you think you understood and you had dialed in just seem to evaporate and move. And some of the, you know, at the end of the day, getting back, I'm starting to bounce around, I'm sorry. You know, there's between, you know, not to get away from Green Bay, but, you know, I fished muskies down south, you know, Kentucky, Illinois, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Canada, Green Bay. You know, and at the end of the day, there's a certain factors that I call it musky math. You know, there's certain things that you can count on to a degree. You know, especially water temperatures. You know, they pretty much all and everything in a muskie's life has to do with water temperature consistency, and food. I'm glad I'm not a muskie, you know, because if I only got to reproduce once a year, I'd but it, you know, that's a factor. You know, and I think, you know, when I think about how much you can put those nuts and bolts together, you know, to get some of your patterns on a system like this, it still can be incredibly elusive and incredibly challenging. And I think, you know, when I think about, you know, some of the really amazing catches, you know, those really big ones, over the 50-inch mark. You know, I know that in an opportunity once I talked to Tony Rizzo, and like he had it worked out for you. He was a guy who logged and kept track of everything he did. You know, and like for every 50-inch muskie, he had, you know, X amount of you know, fish that were 47, 48, 49 inches. You know, a lot more, you know, on a ratio, you know, in that ratio. And it, you know, we were talking about how, you know, somebody, he had read an article about someone who said they had 500 fish over 50, and he's like, I have a hard time getting my head around that. He's like, I have a more hard time getting my head around, you know, that must mean they got like 2,500 48-incher. And when I think about that, you know, it's like, especially, I don't know how many times, you know, you got a fish and then, you know, you're putting that thing in the net. I would have swore everything in my life it was a 50, you know, and 47, 48, you know, it is, they're really deceptive out here. You know, those are really big fish. And that, you know, getting back to that, you know, why is 50 inches, you know, it's still that coveted hang-up mark, you know, that, you know, I feel, I've had people, you know, catch legitimate 49 and 3/4 inch fish, and they were disappointed at the end of the day. You know, like, oh, shit, you know, it's not a 50. I'm like, you might never catch a fish bigger than that in your life again. And that's a fish of a lifetime.
Yeah.
You know, there's no shame in that. There's no, I have more admiration for the person who tells me they caught a 49 and 3/4. You know, because even though it's a 1/4 inch, you know, that's the reality of it. With this fishery, though, you know, I've seen some of the more recent, you know, like feats that, you know, that this is putting out in props, major props, you know, not just the Titletown chapter. I also know the other local chapters that have been involved in this. You know, Greg and Ellen, Jay, Jeff. risk of, you should never start naming names because then you're always going to leave somebody out. But just all the resolution hearings that people attended and advocated to get the size limit increased out here, and way to go to all of you for making that happen. You know, and getting Green Bay to be in line with the other Great Lakes fisheries with the 54-inch limit. Because there's a lot of big fish that that were removed from the system that never got. And I'm not judging that, and I'm not putting that down. Legal is legal. But with the growth rates, it's like, how much more potential could there have been for that span of years? The number of big fish, that were removed. Getting that 54-inch limit, I think, I'm going to call it, in the next 5 years, that this fishery is going to produce the next big fish to go to the top of the ladder, I think, on a national spectrum. And I think that fish, I don't think that fish is going to be caught, though, within the patterns that we typically fish. I believe that fish is out there in deep open water. And if I got one bucket list thing, people are like, you did become a guide again? I was like, no, but I would like to get a really nice boat and be able to have one entire full season that I could spend every single day trolling open water in the bay. I believe there's a fish out there that's never seen a bait. I believe there's a fish out there that could be a legitimate new world record. And part of the reason I say that has to do with a couple of encounters that I did have with my time out there. There's, because even though we know the native population as it was defined was decimated, I'm still not convinced that all those fish were entirely ever gone. Just conversation. I used to talk to anyone that was willing to talk to me, including like commercial fishermen that run, that set nets, for whitefish out there. And some of the most intriguing, provocative locations and destinations have more to do with I can't see any reason why they'd lie about it, but just information that I received from some of the commercial fishermen about fish that they incidentally got in the whitefish nets up some of the reefs further up in the northern part of the bay. And that goes, in given the timeline on when that, I'm not throwing dates out because I don't want to. It's not like I don't want to make something up. That's why I wish I had my little books. But like where I got some of that info, there's no way those fish could have been the result of the reintroduction of of what was happening. Those had to be native fish, that have sustained somehow or migrated from further up in the system somehow. And what convinces me that there's a giant, not a giant population of them, but some true giant fish that maintains solely really in the open waters of Green Bay, or two separate occasions over the course of I think there were back-to-back seasons. The first one was up at Little Sturgeon Bay. It was at that point of the year where we were getting to the end of the pattern. Things were starting to die off, taper off in there. Fish start moving out. And there's a really great weed line that establishes around that deep trough out there. And then early in the season you can fish over the submergent weeds, and then it gets to that point, you got just a little room, you can still work stuff over the top of them, and then they're emergent. You can't even work over the top of them anymore. They're completely emergent, right? And there was so the bay was this way, and this face that way. It must have been pretty much a straight north wind to blow right in there for several days, like shut fishing down. I had to reschedule some trips. It was just rough. It was too rough to even at least fish on that side, or we came down and fished in the river. And the wind had finally backed. It was the first morning the wind had backed off, and went out there with a couple guys. And even though the wind wasn't blowing, it was still rolling. It had that after. I just remember that it was still, the rollers were still pushing into Little Sturgeon. And the water was pushed and stacked up in there so much, I shit you not. There was a solid 12 inches of water above what were the emergent weeds. That water was stacked in there that much from that movement in that volume, that we were burning baits and working baits over all of those weeds. It was like paradise. And we saw a few fish. We didn't have anything in the boat, and I think we took a lunch break, came back out, and we were working along. I wanted to get, I couldn't talk either one of them into. They wanted to work deeper, and so I was fishing on the back of the boat, chucking it's called a G train. The local guy, Eric Vonderbellen, down in Pewaukee made them. It was like a jointed three bucktail body with a number 9 Indiana blade, and it had a single hook on each of them, so you could kind of work it through the weeds too nicely. And I was throwing this G train all the way up the shore, and it working the thing back over the tops of the weeds, and I'm watching it come back from way the hell up there. I remember at first I thought I was looking at it looked like a stingray almost, because it wasn't musky shaped. It was more, and it was kind of like the refraction from the rollers was making the image, kind of increase and decrease. And then the closer it got to the boat, it started taking on more of a torpedo shape. And I was like, is this a miniature submarine? Is this what am I looking at here? I was like, guys. And this fish, if anyone's ever thrown a number 5 MEPS, for early season, I mean, that 9-inch bucktail looked like a little number 5 MEPS right off the tip of the nose of that fish. And I like to think, I think we all like to think, we're calm, cool, we're all that, And I went to go into my figure 8, and that fish just kept going straight. It didn't turn, it didn't move. And it baffled me so much, it rattled me enough that I just stopped and turned around and ran to the other side of the boat, because I wanted to see this thing come on the other side of the boat. But I still couldn't believe what I was seeing. And it didn't come out. And I was like, in hindsight, and if it would have been anybody else, I was like, what the hell is wrong with you? You keep figure eighting, and those big fish, they don't just turn on a figure 8, they gotta go down and they gotta turn around and reacclimate, what is wrong with you? It just, and they're all looking around, now they're like, looking at me like, are you hallucinating? And all of a sudden the guy was like, look, and then came back up from under the boat and went back up to where it came from. And there were several distinguishing things about that fish. One was how dark it was compared to the light colorations and the light shading of what we typically would see with the barred muskies. It was a really dark fish. It was really long. It was. I remember the eyeballs were really big. They were really far apart. And as it swam, when I watched it swim away, just the diameter of the tail meat right in front of the tail fin, had in my opinion, I'm not saying I'm an expert on any of this. I've seen enough 3-foot muskies in my life to say that tail meat part looked like the average body size of a 3-foot muskie. I mean, this fish had it all. It was long, it was wide, it was tall, it was thick, all the way through. Easily an upper 50-inch class fish. It's easy to say that was a 60-inch class fish. It was definitely, it was beyond any bar or perspective that I could even put onto a big muskie. It was, and to thread this all together, you can think about the proximity of little sturgeon to the open water, the conditions that were occurring for 3 days, the number of bait fish that we were marking just unlocated that were blowing up and stacked up into there. Like I said, I've never had a chance to talk to an English-speaking muskie, but it sure made sense that rogue open water fish would have followed that forage base that it's typically keyed in on out in. And if we think about, and even just how shallow it came from, over the years, I used to think, boy, isn't it crazy how some of the muskies, like they like to sunbathe, and lay up in those shallows. And over the years, with and agreeing with other conversations I've had with people, it just makes sense that a fish that has gorged itself and has a full belly, that especially if it's coming out of deeper, colder water, you know, it's going to take advantage of that shallow, warmer water opportunity to increase that metabolism rate, digest the food that's in its stomach. You know, it's not sunbathing, it's digesting, so it can go and do what it does best, eat more food. That was one experience, and then it was the following year, same conditions, same exact thing, but only at the mouth of where you would go into Sawyer Harbor, up in the main ship channel, and we were working like from where the lighthouse is, that whatever that Shorewood Point is at. But there's like a house on the end of that little point there before you actually get into, and then that spine kind of, you know, there's like a break with a weed line. We were working along that, and pretty much a carbon copy experience. Another fish of the caliber of the one that I just described, also a very dark fish. You know, after all that wind and that open water from the adjacent open water, you know, being stacked up in there. And we had launched that little sturgeon that day. As a matter of fact, I was usually pretty much dead beat and tired and ready to go home and get a good night's sleep before because I was usually booked back to back every day. The guys I had out that day, they were cooked. Take us home. Ran it back down to little sturgeon, and they're like, "You want us to hold the boat?" I was like, "No, I'm going. I'm going back." We settled up. They took off. I turned the boat around, and I shot back up. And I called my buddy that I stayed with at the time. I picked him up from across over at the whatever that boat launch is that they redid over there.
Quarry.
The quarry. Thank you. I happened to launch there one day when it was the old quarry, and when we were coming back in, he was like, "Boy, there's a lot of utility vehicles hanging around here." Like, "We were waiting for you to get your ass in here so we can finish pulling the ramp up." Picked my buddy up, fished with him. He was tired. That was one of the few times in my life I literally stayed out in the boat all night long. I slept in the boat every time I woke up. Took a few casts on that waypoint. Next morning, you know, I went and picked my client up and caught a little sturgeon the next morning. And he was one of my lucky clients. He caught a lot of big fish with me down in Waukesha County over the years. I knew he would, you know, have no problem throwing whatever. I could have daisy chained 10 bulldogs together and said, "Yeah, cast these." You'd be like, "Okay." And he worked hard all day, and sure enough, he finally hooks up. I had Kirk Parker from channel whatever over here on speed dial. I was like, I'm gonna call Kirk and tell him we got the one. It was a pike. And that's not what we saw the day before. It was a 48-inch pike. And that time I high-fived and I hooted and I hollered. I was like, "This is a really awesome fish, dude." And that was the only 2 times that I've ever seen fish of that caliber on this system in all my hours out there, and both of those times I only saw those fish once, and I'm convinced that those were open water fish, and what the population is, what the ratio of how many person hours you got to put in to even try and chase one of those out there. I really believe that opportunity just waits every day out there, you know, and it would always haunt me. You know, fishing all the other spots, you know, and just look out there and think, it's out there somewhere. You know, it's like, I'd even like to, you know, I always thought it would be a cool idea to get as many people who are as interested as possible to just line up and make a trolling line from shoulder to shoulder, and you know, and dedicate a week to just raking open water, you know, to really go after it. Yeah. All right, we had a couple volunteers. Especially after seeing one on a little sturgeon, like the one on little sturgeon, that I played around with some of that open water the years after that. As a matter, I think it was the following year. I used to start putting. I'd keep my eye on the perch fishermen. Those guys, they're funny. Just trying to chat with them. Like, How you doing? What's up? None of your business, you know. I don't want to sleep with your wife. Are you fishing for, you catching perch? You know? Talk about us being crazy. I think those perch guys, that whole perch community, they're a whole nother level of, don't worry about what we're doing. But when they would start setting up and targeting those fish that suspended in open water adjacent to that main break, just outside of along that south shore, outside of that little sturgeon area, I would start. I concentrated on. We did a lot of trolling out there. We did catch a few fish. Nothing, always nice fish. It's hard to not catch a good fish on Green Bay, right? But there was one. We were, I can't remember exactly what the entire spread was, but I know that the two flat lines I was running the really large slammer deep divers, and they have a big lip on them. And I had those in the flat lines, and sure enough, the one flat line lit up and went. And the guys I had out that day knew their stuff, they knew what they were doing. And it took them everything he had to get the rod. I used the down east rod holders, and you got to get that pressure off the holders so you can lift it up and out, right? And it took them everything to get that rod out of that rod holder. And it felt like forever. This fight was going on forever, and you making no ground. The fish came off, and when we got the bait up, the nose of the bait was snapped off where the groove was cut for the bill to fit in, and the through wire was pulled all the way out down to the first hook. And two of the hooks, so two of the chubbles, they were straightened completely out, and there were three gouges right into the body of, through the clear coat, through the paint, just whoop, through the top of the back of that thing. I showed Bill that, Bill Schwartz, like, dude, look at this. It's like, damn, what the hell kind of fish was that? That one haunts me a little bit still too. And I think, even, I never got to go. I got a little discouraged because when I first started thinking about trolling out there, I remember I went out with a buddy and we set up, and I thought, okay, let's start up at the end of Larson's Reef, and we'll work the 25-foot break line all the way down to Snake Island. We're marking a lot of big fish. I was like, those are big, there's got to be muskies, keyed in, adjacent to open water. Those same big slammers, sure enough, one of the rods lights up. I kid you not, it was a 46-inch flathead catfish. Talk about fight, the way this thing's, we got that thing in. Of course, all three hooks are in its mouth with its mouth pinned shut, and I didn't have replacement hooks, so I didn't want to cut the hooks. Finally got the hooks out, got the thing going, got it out, got set up. We weren't 5 minutes further down that break. Same rod, again. This got to be one. 48-inch flathead catfish. So if any of you are interested in trolling for some big catfish, some big flatheads, the 25-foot break line out on Larson's Reef is a good starting point. I used to branch out as much as I could further away from the crowds, especially. The furthest northern destination that I can recall seeing a muskie was out on Chambers Island. The furthest north that we caught was off of Horseshoe Bay, across from Nicolay Bay, up by Ephraim, just north of Fish Creek. I took a couple guys out for opening day one year. We started in a little sturgeon, and I like these guys. I met them on the PMTT. They were young dudes. They showed up in a 16-footer. They kicked ass with it. They hung tight with everybody. They didn't give a shit that their boat was the smallest boat out of everybody. I just adored these guys. And, hard fishermen. We caught a nice fish. at one point in the day, and they, you know, and they were like, well, where else do you go around here? Take us somewhere you have never taken anybody. Seriously? Okay, so we started kind of working our way up. Before I knew it, we were up at Egg Harbor. And so we're chucking baits and we're moving around. And the one guy, he's all gung-ho, and the guy in the front of the boat, he's like, what are we fishing here? He's like, there's nothing. There's no weeds, it's just sand and some dark mat spots. He's like, just wherever you see those dark mat spots, he's like, I guarantee they lay on that shit and they pop up out of nowhere. I guarantee you, they're laying there. It's like, he turned around, he starts casting out deeper where you couldn't at least see his bait. He's like, I can't do this anymore. And sure enough, that mat of weeds that he was going to cast to his buddy out the back, he's like, look. And sure, he's like, it just popped up out of nowhere. I was looking at it, and I thought to myself, there ain't nothing out there. And sure enough, there it was, you know. There's, you know, and I share that just, you know, I even as a guide, there were times, you know, where I desperately wanted to just kind of go follow the crowd. It's like, well, you know, but then there's that, you know. Then once then you're following the crowd. You know, now I'm not fishing. You know, now I'm getting out of my game. You know, and there's no shortage of places to explore. There's no shortage of opportunities out there. You know, it's just a matter of, you know, can you put up. I always would go back to, even if we go and find nothing, this isn't going to be the first time I put a boat in the water and put it back on the trail while catching a muskie. You know, it's the only way to learn a new spot. It's the only way to learn, try a new pattern, try a new technique. I could go on and on about examples and stuff, and I don't know if there's any value in anything I'm even sharing. Like I said when I started, you know, all of you here, you know, collectively done more fishing in this last year than I have in the last 10 years. I guarantee you that. And part of what I wanted to do tonight was just share a little perspective of what it was like as a guide out here at one point. Definitely I wanted to leave and save some time to answer any questions anybody may have. I might not have the answer, but I'm happy to share anything that you'd be interested in knowing about, or I'm just gonna segue into that. Anybody have any questions, curiosities? Yes, sir.
So when you're doing that, when you're exploring a new spot or whatever, what's your mindset on baits? Are you just throwing baits that you've had success with in other spots, or are you trying different? I mean, I guess, what's your mindset when you're exploring a place you haven't fished before? What would your thought
Sure.
process be then?
You know, I'm going to give a two-part to that. Some of my exploration didn't require, you know, giant big boat rides. You know, for me, exploration is going to that next. What would be the next adjacent pattern to what everybody's been doing that no one else is doing? You know, everyone's up on top of the reef, casting on top of this reef. You know, those fish don't live there all day. Especially when you know there's not a lot of bait and a lot of, you know, are those fish there because there's bait and cover? Especially if there's not a lot of bait and cover. You know, getting back to, are these fish that are dialed in on more of an open water pattern or a deeper water pattern? And they're up there taking advantage of some more water opportunity off the metabolism, so they can go back to where the majority of the food is. You know, so, you know, exploring can be something as simple as that. And whenever I did explore, if it was a casting pattern or a trolling, you know, whichever pattern, definitely top shelf. Whatever my top shelf baits are, I'm going with confidence baits, going with stuff that I, you know, and even here's an additional answer to even that. Best time to try new bait are the days that fish are biting. Not on the days they're not, because all that's ever done for me is blow my confidence in what could have been the best bait of my life, you know, and write it off and go, well, they ain't biting on this either. Well, they weren't biting on anything to begin with. Right. Best day to get confidence in a new bait that you've never thrown is definitely on, you know, on day. You know, and then some people would say, why the hell would you take off the bait that's working? True, you know, keep that one in the water, but rotate in that new one. Um, you know, definitely, especially, the nice thing about trolling is you can put your top shelf lineup out there, and there's always enough, you know, if there's a couple guys in the boat, you have enough lines in the water, you can rotate in that, you know, that even when I would have challenges on days with trolling bites out here, I would keep the majority of my confidence baits, you know, the producer baits, and then start working in something different. It's like, okay, we got to try something different, you know, and even on some of those days, I would say, I moved and switched baits around enough. It had sometimes it was less to do with bait color or size and more to do with location of boat, you know. You know, especially under more heavy pressure situations, it was always the last port, the furthest one away. You know, and it gets back to kind of that pressure, and you know, and one of the phenomenons that I always got a kick out of, that I still couldn't tell you, you know, and as much as we'd all like to say, well, you know, it was the moon phase, or it was this, it was that, it was this, it was that. You know, some of those days, you know, where especially on the weekend when the troops would show up, and there'd be 50 boats out here, you know, in University Bay back in like, you know, 07 and 08. You can see everybody. you're all crossing paths. 50 boats, everybody's seated, and all of a sudden, one person, you see a couple guys pop up, and then another couple, and before you know it, 10 or 12 boats are all hooked up on fish. You know, why? Why is that? You know, and it, you know, and one of the things that I still really firmly believe that summarizes a muskie in a nutshell, the two top characteristics, components are they're predatorial and they're territorial. The territorial one got a little shattered in my mind when you see how many will be concentrated in one spot out here. But their keenest sense is that lateral line detection. You know, that's how they key in on. I believe, you know, bait color has less to do with water displacement of a lure. You know, and I think that's why when the double tens really got hot, were such a hot bait, they just move and displace so much water. You know, and when the bulldogs move and displace a lot of water. You know, it's a lot of lateral line detection. You know, for a fish to key in on, especially in a system like in the lower part of the bay, where visibility is, you know, practically zero sometimes. You know, it's all about lateral line detection. And in my mind, I always thought, you know, when that one fish finally tripped, well, 46-inch muskie, for example. Now, we're moving 6 to 10-inch baits around out there, and that's displacing enough water to attract one fish, right, or trip their trigger. Imagine how much water is getting displaced by a 48-inch fish as it's thrashing around down there. You know, and maybe it's not necessarily so much of the predatorial component of a muskie at that point, but maybe get back to that territorial aspect and some sort of connect. You know, as that water displacement continued to, you know, occur. You know, you went from one now to two fish that are thrashing around down there. Almost, I would call it like a shockwave effect, because on days that I'd be the only boat or one of maybe 3 boats out there, that kind of shit didn't happen. You know, so there's something to be said about, you know, as much as, you know, people would get, I know all of us would get frustrated about, you know, feeling kind of crowded at times or whatever. I feel like that was one of the most, you know, sometimes that was part of the magic, you know, having that much displacement happening and going on. Way off track from your question.
Oh, it's okay.
But, you know, and then, as far as exploring, one of the things I would do in my free time at night, I had maps all over the place. You know, and if I had a really good day on a certain pattern in a certain area, I'd go back to that map and really look at the characteristics of, you know, what were the structure characteristics, you know, what were the Mother Nature conditions as far as water temperature, barometer, wind direction. You can't excuse it, you know, you can't hang your hat on it, but the more you keep record of and look at what was working under certain conditions, you can put together more consistent patterns. But based off of a really good day, that's when I would, really go with a magnifying glass over the rest of the bay and say, okay, what else looks just like this? What else looks just like this? What else is just like this and is adjacent to open water? Or where's there another shallow shelf adjacent to the main river channel that we could try casting tomorrow? Learn, our best teachers are experience, and whatever successes that you have are your best indicators of what to look, and getting back to that, forget about the whole bay, just find what looks like a musky lake as far as one section of the bay, and then really focus and dedicate and stick to that. Don't just give it an hour, really give it a full day, give it 2 full days, and then after the 3rd day, get nothing, and you heard everyone lit them up back down and off a long tail or whatever. And if you do get into something, don't say anything. Whatever you do. That was half my things half the time. We'd be pulled up to the dock, I'd tell clients, like, anybody ask you how we did, we got skunked. We didn't get shit. People would call, be like, hey, how'd you do yesterday? Oh, we got skunked. So-and-so told me you got 13 fish yesterday. It's like, you're the only person who lies in the opposite direction. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Could you talk, you mentioned your early season exploits up in Sturgeon Bay and Little Sturgeon Bay. I knew you fished there like opener. Have you ever fished much down in the Fox or any other tributaries during the opener? And if so, could you talk about your mindset, how you approach the opener and transition into the casting bite?
Okay, and great question. And in my mind, in my experience even, that's the nice thing about the bay. It's like, versus in what I say, like in comparison to, say, maybe your favorite 500-acre lake or 1,000-acre lake that you would ordinarily go to for an opener, that 1,000-acre lake, even a 5,000-acre lake, it's going to be what it is for the opener, pretty much across the board and across the spectrum. If you think about from the dam up here into Pier all the way up to Chambers Island, you've got potentially 4 different seasons for the opener, or options, and there have been seasons, some of my rhyme and reason or noticeabilities over the seasons where really good openers on Little Sturgeon meant stuff was pretty much done and out of the river already, versus if it was a really cold spring, and things are really slow and way behind for the openers, say up north somewhere, typically then, halfway through the day, what was on the trailer, we're putting in down at the river, and it would be night and day. You could be looking at literally a 10-degree water temperature difference from up there to down here, somewhere within that margin, which is night and day for early season muskie. Water temperature I've found to be a big factor in picking that opener destination. The colder springs have blended and trended better toward, like the Fox or even stuff adjacent to the other feeder rivers, those feeder rivers. And at this point, I feel like all the feeder rivers are legitimate, whether they were introduced there naturally or stocked there. It seems to me, I haven't talked to anybody, from any of the biologists in many years, or anybody, and maybe some of you know, but, I feel like the maturity of the population of the fish at this point have established, within what would be natural spawning territories, river tributaries, even if they weren't stocked there, and it makes me wonder, like, is what degree, if any, and I believe there's got to be some degree of natural reproduction actually occurring out here.
A little bit.
So there's so much, which broadens, those destinations and tactics and techniques as far as, because what works here, if you take what you know about the Fox River, you can't, it is a template, for all the other tributary rivers or tributary systems in their own sense, as even if you think about the feeders, let's say through the Sturgeon Bay Ship Channel, there's always an angle, you know, and it's just a matter of having that time, you know, there's no substitute for time on the water, you know, even a day on the water, not catching the fish, if you're learning about, you know, what the structure is like, what the water temperature tendencies are in comparison to where you typically fish, you know, some of those little factors like that, even without going too far, you know, you know, there were certain spots, you know, shallow sand flat areas in the early part of the season from 10 o'clock to 1 o'clock, this is where we're going to be. Because, you know, you know, there's anywhere from a 3 to 5 degree water temperature increase in those spots compared to the rest of the area. And they will utilize that, and they will, you know, become more active and move into there. Even if you just happen to be cruising, we would take rides sometimes and just try to sight, you know, where they were laying, even if they weren't looking at baits. Make note, waypoint, and come back at that peak part of the day early in the season when that water warms up a little more, and converted a lot of those fish, you know, into fishing than that. So, did that get to your question? Or is there a missing piece there? Let me know.
One other thing, I guess, to that point is, what you touched on is how we can actually, if we typically have, say, a late spring, we can fish the fox, you know, and then we can actually extend our opener, because that bite will only last so long.
Right.
Then we can extend that opener by moving further north, up to the Pensacola, the Oconto, the Peshtigo and Menominee, and even up to Door County. I guess what I want to touch, get your perspective on is, once that, say, the initial spawn is pretty much done and most of those fish have done their duty, that transition, staying on those fish after that spawn, how did you approach that?
You know, and that was
that's probably the toughest time out here.
And that's probably where in my opinion, where the greatest value of early season, you know, starting on opening day, and even scouting. I'd go out a week before, you know, just sight, you know, where fish land, what are they doing, you know, what stage of the spawn are they in, because you know, if you get back to what I referred to or called earlier as like Musky math, everything's built around knowing where it all kicked off, you know, where are your big females hanging out, where are they spawning, where are they conjugated, because your pattern for that region for the rest of the season, if you go through your, you know, from your spawn to post-spawn to summer pattern, into fall pattern, then back into winter pattern, you know, as they get back in the winter pattern, that whole cycle is built on a cyclical basis off of, you know, where they were in the beginning, you know, because for the majority of the fish in the system, you know, will year after year will go back to those same locations. How they know how to find that stuff, I have no idea, but they do, you know, so that's where your time on the water, you know, becomes your most valuable asset, your own personal experiences. It's one thing for a person to say, yeah, we saw a great big one, you know, over there, biggest fish we ever saw. But when you dedicate enough time to that region, that territory, that pattern, you're like, yep, you know, that's where they always are, you know, for spawn. You know, and I used to think, well, they weren't here this year. Well, no, things warmed up a lot quicker, and they're just already gone. You know, I'm fishing the right spot, but I'm 2 weeks off already on
That happened this year.
on what happened with that pattern. You know, I should be out. You know, some of the things we would even do. You've seen a lot of fish in those spawn areas and at post spawn. The first fish to usually boogie out of those areas are the females, and the males will hang around for quite a while. And one of the first spots, if you want to go chase after those big post-spawn females who are looking to recoup all the energy they just spent and exhausted spawning, are those first adjacent primary breaks is where they'll be established and hung out. You know, so, you know, whenever you get those opportunities to listen to somebody, you know, give a seminar on those patterns or read those articles, you know, that are written, you know, those are the nuggets of gold that help us, you know, then put together our Musky math, you know, because it's the same on Lake Shelbyville as it is on Cape Run, as it is on Mille Lacs, as it is on Lake of the Woods, as it is on Green Bay, and having that, you know, so, you know, and at the end of the day, we put together our best plans. Sometimes I still don't but I look back in hindsight, I'm like, did I really know what I was thinking, you know, what I was doing, or, you know, was I just the recipient of, like, you know what the number one key is to catching big fish? Fish water with big fish. You know, and how many hours I spent on lakes that just didn't have big fish, trying to catch big fish, spinning my wheels. You know, and so half that battle's already achieved for all of us on this system out here. You're fishing water with big fish. You know, you want to catch, you know, and if you want to stay on big fish, then if that's your goal, you know, which typically means less numbers, you know, you're going to, you know, if you want to catch big fish and really target those, that's some mental conditioning and some mental commitment, you know, to know I'm going to be putting the boat on and off the trailer more days than often without fishing than I am, you know, but if that's what you're really wired to do, you know, you can buy go some of the action, you can buy go some of the numbers, and really systematic, and that's where I think, you know, a lot of those big fish opportunities translate back into, has a lot to do, you know, and it all ties back into, you know, what are the main tributaries that they're spawning in, and then systematically as you work through those cycles, you know, where's your open water bait fish patterns, you know, because bait fish is everything too. If you wanted to snipe me out, you know, and you had to take one shot at where to find me, sit in a chair next to my refrigerator. I'm going to show up to eat sooner or later. You know, and if you move the refrigerator to the other side of the room, guess what? I'm not going to go over there anymore. I'm going to go over to the other side of the room. And it's the same with you know, as much as the muskies move, the muskies move more because of the conditions in the refrigerator moving around than because of their desire, you know, because they're adventurous, roaming, you know, world explorers. It's about sex in the spring, and the rest of the year it's about food. Did you have a question? No. So, you know, even in paying attention to that, you know, and oh my gosh, Joel invited, I went up with a buddy of mine, we fished with Joel last year, and just over the course of 9 years, and I'm looking at this locator, and I'm like, what happened with the world? It's like a video game. Shit, yeah, I thought, you know, having a color screen, you know, with being able to see the map contour lines was a big deal 9 years ago. It was like with the side imagery and just the technology advancements in electronics today, such an advantage and an asset to that ability and capacity to, you know, when it came to my electronics, threading this back into what we were talking about, I used my electronics more water temperature, structure content, but mainly bait, food, refrigerator, you know, where's the food. And I think anytime you do catch some of those fish that aren't maybe necessarily keyed in on, you know, then there's those stretches of those transition stretches between maybe good spot A and good spot B. You know, it's like deer. Anybody who deer hunts, you know, deer like edges, they like funnels, they like, you know, you take two branches out in the woods and you bend them over and tie them together with parachute cord and make an arch. The next day they'll be walking through that arch. Why? I don't know. You know, but, you know, and you know, you get a contour edge of some sort, and the fish will use that instead of just, you know, if it's not that they wander aimlessly out in open water, they're out in open water following food, you know, following that forage. And I don't want to windbag my welcome out and extend my stay here by any means, but because I'm a windbagger. I'll talk till.
When's the last time you shrunk wrap a boat? Or a car, a truck?
I never shrunk wrap a truck, but I did call.
Tell the story. It's a good thing. Him and Alexander.
Me and Alexander, we're friends, and we gave each other a hard time over the years. We were always one-upping each other with practical jokes, and I called over at the yacht club one day. It was getting to be that time of year, they're shrink wrapping boats. I said, hey, how much you guys charge to shrink wrap a truck? They're like, whose? I was like, Alexander's. Nothing, free charge.
It was great.
Sure as shit. He comes in off the water at the end of the day, his truck is out there buttoned up tight as a drum. He got me back for that, but yeah, that was a good one.
That was a good one.
A lot of fun, you know, and that's what muskie fishing, you know, at the end of it should be about. It should be about, I know we all work hard to figure out the things we figure out, but at the same time, you know, what I love about, you know, especially muskie clubs is, you know, the camaraderie, the friendship, the relationships we make, you know, and this is our best source of information, you know. My muskie fishing improved and got a lot better the day I gave up on trying to be the best muskie fisherman in the world. Because that was my goal. That was a goal at one point. I wanted to be that guy, and that didn't work. That never worked out for me. You know, and when I got back to what was important, especially from the perspective of a guide, you know, and that being a quality day for the people in the boat, what their goals were, and working hard for them. The fish results just happened a lot more naturally, and I enjoyed it a lot more along the way, and I'm so grateful for that. God, I could tell a million stories. Any other questions, curiosities? Yes, sir.
Do you have anybody that, when you were spending a lot of time on the water, that spent some time on the open water idea that you were talking about? There's very few people even willing to try that.
Not many, no.
Okay.
No.
I mean, it takes like the right kind of person.
It does.
And there's a lot, I think, that goes into that. If you were to, like you say, you talked about if you had a season to do it, if you could take a 1 month time that you feel like there's, you know, obviously some times of the year that'll be better than that, others for the open water, what 1 month of the year would you do that open water? Would you pick July? Would you pick August? Would you pick June after the spawn and they move out?
Right. Yeah.
I was just curious what you have your mind thought. We were talking about the whole movement of the fish, and I'm just curious your thought process on
A
that.
good question. And I feel like that's a hard one to answer.
Well, it is. I mean,
Because it would be easy to say, well, there'd be no, you know, you really wouldn't want to do it in fall because you've got so many great fall patterns. You know, a lot of those fish are moving in, you know, and seeking, you know, because they're following that food. But then that still goes to beget, what about that one that's still doing its thing in the same pattern and really strapping on the
And obviously
feed bag.
Sturgeon Bay, you know, 30 to 70 or, you know, so much deep water up that way versus out here 25, 30 feet of water is deep. So obviously when we talk open water basin, that's, I just was curious.
I feel like-
I think about it every summer. And
I feel like, you know, a sensible time, you know, a lot of bait fish do move out of the open water. You know, there's more of an open water thing. You know, open water is like a peak summer pattern for muskies in general. Even if you're casting, you know, like a lot of, even on smaller lakes, we hardly fish structure. You know, in the middle of the season when I fished open to close, like Sam Pewaukee or Okachi, especially Okachi and Oconomowoc, which were more, they were a deeper basin lake. And we fished, you know, if we were casting, I used, again, back to my locator, and even that one fish I talked about that ripped the shreds out of that slammer, we were in 45 feet of water, and every now and then we were reading 25 feet for depth. That's how thick the schools of bait fish were, you know, that we were trolling through. and that was the same thing I'd do, like even casting open water, using the electronics to, you know, if you're in 50 feet of water and you're suddenly reading 25 feet of water and you know there's not a sandbar out there, you know you're on top of you know you're on top of bait fish. You know, that's a good, you know, if you're not into trolling, that's a good open water casting. You know, because I had a gentleman, we were casting that same pattern outside a little sturgeon in that deeper water, counting our baits down, working them 25, 30 feet deep, even deeper, to the point where when that bait was to the boat, it was still down, and instead of a figure eight, so to speak, you know, the finale then was ripping it straight up to the boat and then going into the figure eight. And we were both, I had a good enough, he was fishing solo, he was all the way up at the front end of the front platform, and I was at the back, I was on the front deck with him, casting behind, you know, next to him, but second in line. And I was paying attention to my thing, and I'll never forget hearing him just go, oh my God, he's like, what is this? He was pulling, as he was bringing that bulldog back up out of the depths. It looked like a 5-gallon bucket coming up out of the bottom of the depths, just that mouth wide open coming. And it freaked him out so hard, you know, when it finally ate, he just, he didn't get hooks in it, I don't know what happened, but it you know, they're out there, you know, so I would, you know, maybe mix it up a little bit, you know, and try it on your good days on a casting pattern on a reef. You know, go to Jason and try. But if you really wanted to dedicate some time, I think like late June and in the late August would probably be an ideal time to. You know,
Well, I just think about through all the times that the random muskies are caught, you know, when you talk about the crawler harnesses and the walleyes, and you hear about all that stuff, so you know they're there.
right.
There's very few people that dedicate a lot of time. There's a couple people, I think, but it's not a lot. Now, there's more and more muskies being caught salmon fishing now the last few years.
Sure.
It's being verbalized, film with that, and pictures of that. So that makes me think. I think I'll try Green Bay before I try Lake Michigan. But
Right. You know, in that being said, you know, it gets back to, especially if you're going to troll open water. I mean, now you know, trolling contours, trolling the reefs and stuff. At least, you know, there's a little rhyme and reason to that. You know, and that's where your electronics, you know, come back to being such a critical component when you're especially exploring open water and you're trolling open water, using, you know, throwing your waypoints on where those bait fish are. And after a couple of hours, you can kind of start to put together a lake. You know, getting back to that lake concept, forget about the rest of the bay. You know, I know I've got about a quarter-mile radius right here that is adjacent to this, that, and the other thing with consistent bait. You know, now key in on it, you know, and then just keep working that and work it and don't give up and keep working it. You know, there's apples and oranges. There was there was, I forget what year it was, but I got to be pretty good friends with Kirk Parker, who used to be outdoor sportcaster for whatever channel out of town here. And we did a few segments here and there over the years, and he called me up one day and said, "Dennis, we got some new camera gear, wireless, remote, like we can go a mile offshore with this stuff." He's like, let's go out and catch a muskie. And at that point, he wasn't a sportcaster anymore. He transferred over to like the morning field editor reporter, you know, like the community reporting on this, that, and the other thing. He's like, what do you say? You know, let's pick a day and we'll catch a fish. He's like, yeah, we'll just catch a fish on live TV, no problem. Where do you want to go? He's like, well, you know, what about that bite out there in University Bay? And for the time of year, it was still, you know, in my opinion, I was like, oh, if we could go 3 or, you know, and then 2 or 3 weeks later, he's like, it's got to, you know, he's like, oh, dude, you're killing me. He's like, not the, you know, it's like, as long as you're cool with, you know, we'll, you know, when they cut to us, we'll talk about what we're doing, why we're doing it, but I don't have a lot of confidence we're going to catch a fish. You know, so we met right behind the roller coaster here on the shoreline for the first segment, and it was opening day of duck hunting. Pissed off all the duck hunters who were out there 3 hours before us and set up, you know, the generators going, lights are going, what the hell are you guys doing? Sorry, you know, and then we finished that segment, scrambled to get the boat in the water and get back out, get on the water. A couple minutes, it came back to us, we're on the water, here we are, here's what we're doing, here's what we're going to use. And then we had X amount of time until they were going to cut to us again. And as I was going through there, I'm looking at waypoints from the past. But the thing on my locator, there's just tons of big fish. Yeah, and then the camera guy is like, well, you know, we got to be going this direction because I need the sun in my back. I'm like, anything else? You know? I'm like, all right, I want to know what time they're cutting back to us because I want to be going in the right direction for the camera. I want to be going through this bait fish, you know, if there's any chance. I kid you not, you couldn't make this shit up. You know, sure enough, they cut back to us. We come around, you know, we just get done swinging around Kidney Island, and we're making the sweep through there, going through all this bait fish, and he says, you know, well, how do you know we can get a fish on one of these things, Dennis? I was like, well, you're gonna hear this, you know, and I gave one rip on the line to make the line clicker go, and poof. Sure, I'll be dipped. You know, obviously more luck than anything, but it comes back to having your, you know, sometimes, you know, having the historic data, you know, for waypoints, knowing about, you know, bait fish, you know, a location, a spot, knowing where the, you know, and when you got vast sand flats, you know, typically a pile of gravel doesn't mean anything in the muskie world, but a pile of gravel means everything. You know, that's ambush, that's structure, you know, in a vast expanse of nothingness. You know, and so having those little things, you know, definitely tips the scales in our advantage. And I keep looking over my shoulder here at this picture. My hair used to be so blonde. This, you know, and this is, you know, back to, you know, I got along with the other guides out here. That particular day was, I had that day set up. I was going out with Paul Smith from the Milwaukee Journal and taking my dad out for the first time. It would be my dad's first time ever fishing. You know, he always teased me with all his buddies. My son's a muskie guide, and I've never caught a muskie. And so I had a motor problem. I had to take my boat into the shop, and I was going to cancel it. And Brett was like, it was really generous of him. He's like, dude, use my boat. I got the day open, just take my boat. I was like, I'm not taking it. He's like, using somebody else's boat, you know, I'd be like, well, take my wife, you know, have fun with her. He's like, no, dude, it's like, no, I want you to come along. You know, let's do it together. Then you're more than welcome. It'll be, you know, it'll be really cool. And sure enough, you know, I've only got 2 replicas that hang in my house. One's a 50-inch tiger that I caught with Greg and Ellen. Thank you, Greg. Greg guided me to that fish, netted it for me, took the picture. And then my dad's personal best, a 48-inch muskie that he caught 2 muskies that day in a big pike. And the 48 was the biggest one out there trolling in the bay. And he passed away this year. You know, it's just, I look at that fish every day and I think, you know, thank goodness for Green Bay. So if I would have taken him anywhere else, he would have had a picture, you know, drinking a cup of coffee. Yeah, and just a testimony to, even though I know people can get, you know, talk about territorial and predatorial, muskie guides and muskie fishermen. I'm grateful that I was always able to live in harmony with my competitors, be friendly with them, you know, and with everybody. You know, I learned a long time ago that everybody brings happiness through a situation. You know, and some people it's because they showed up, and some it's because when they leave. You know? I was that person for a long time, you know, and I want to be one of those people on the journey. You know, the happiness happens because I showed up. You know, I want to bring good, and I want to be good, and I want to be a good brother and a neighbor, and a friend to my society. Anyway, is it getting too late? Should I shut up? Should I
You're
stop?
very good.
Any other question?
I got another question. It's
Yes.
somebody else, but well, I guess a lot of guys like my age, like I moved up here 6 years ago. I started fishing the bay probably 8 to 10 years ago, whatever. But the kind of numbers that you're talking about, like I get to spend a lot of days out there. If we get 2 fish or 3 fish, that's like awesome. Like how often was it that you would go out and catch, you know, 8, 10, or 13 fish or whatever? Like what was your like an average day at that time? Like what were you looking at as far as like the fish you'd catch and the size structure and stuff? Like to me that just is crazy. Like
Sure.
That's not how it seems to be now. I don't know. So
Double-digit days were not a daily occurrence, you know, at all. I was thrilled and excited in '06 to just have. I'm going to go on the conservative side. That casting bite in September of 2006 in the river. It was 21 days straight with a fish in the boat. You know, and just to be having, you know, a fish every day. You know, compared to.
awesome.
You know, you fish 21 days in a row on Okachi or Oconomowoc or Pewaukee, you're not putting a fish in the boat every day. you know, just that in itself was a thrill. Having double and triple fish days got really exciting. And it was that stretch that we had a day, the first day that we cracked 10, we had 10 fish in one day. The best trolling day, I had one guy in the boat. We went 13 for 17. We voted 13 fish, and at one point we had a triple header. We had 3 fish in the net.
2006, 2007, right?
That was 7 or 8 maybe.
Yeah, that was crazy.
You know, and that has less to do with me being the best muskie fisherman in the world, and more to do with just the privilege and the luxury that I had of being able to be out there all day, every day. You know, you hang out. You know, if you hang out at a nudist beach all day, every day, I'm going to see more tata than the person who goes there. Yeah, that's just a lot. It's not because I'm an expert tata locator. You put yourself in position. You know that there's something to just be said about time on the water. You know, so. You know, and a lot of special days. You know, there was. I remember there was one. And sometimes I would always give customers the option of, you know, pack your lunch and stay in the boat all day, or you know, especially later on in, you know, remember when Fox Harbor Bar and Grill reopened or opened for lunch? We were the only. They gave me a free fish dinner every Friday. They were so thankful. They were like, "You bring people in here every day." I'm still like, "You're amazing," you know. And now they're like, you can hardly get a place to sit at one point. It's like I liked it better when nobody was in here. You know, we could get in and out. And I had a couple gentlemen come up. I think it was 08. You know, we were going to go in and get lunch up at Fox Harbor midday, and we'd been out there. We were the only boat. It was a super foggy morning. Like, you couldn't see anything. You couldn't even see, well, you can see the power plant better today than you could have that day, because it's gone, right? You couldn't even see it. It was just pea soup. And I thought, oh man, we're going to light them up. Nothing. And then all of a sudden, the wind shifted a little bit, the fog blew up, and it got really sunny. And the next thing I know, they got right out of the gate at 48, and then it was like, well, it wouldn't make sense to go in for lunch right now. So we kind of rallied and cooled up. We rationed out granola bars and cashews and water bottles, and by not going to lunch, they ended up with 48 or 49 or 50 and a 51. It was like 1-inch increments. You know, over the course of about, it was within an hour. It was like we couldn't get set back up. We released, get set back up, try and get going again, boom, and just over. It just kept happening and happening. You know, it's like, you know, and why? You know, why all of a sudden just like that? You know, and then nothing the rest of the day again. All morning, nothing. You know, so, you know, and I think about people, you know, like even me back, you know, before I could be out all day, every day, you know, give my best effort for a half a day, you know, and how many times I put the trailer on, you know, 10 minutes before that window opened up. Or vice versa, put the boat in the water 10 minutes after, you know, the best just got done. So I don't know what's normal anymore out there today, but I would still say anytime you put a fish in a boat for your effort on the water, that's an awesome day, you know. And as we all know, and probably all experience, this fishery definitely, you know, can spit out. When it gets going, it gets going. And when it shuts down, it really shuts down. It can get just as tough too. So that's a little perspective on that. You know, it all ranges and varies a little. The casting patterns I found were, you know, with the exception of that that fall in the river, you know, some of like the further north patterns, there were some stinky stretches in there. You know, sea fed, you know, where it wasn't every day. You know, but then again too, you know, you just don't have the benefit to cover as much water casting as you're going to be able to trolling as well. but even on the, there were some good casting days, where we, doubled up a couple times 3. I think the best casting day ever was 4 that I can recall off the top of my head. Anyone else?
You talked about the giants that you saw up on the east shore. Anything comparable up on the west shore ever?
For the time that I worked out here, I just never spent a lot of time on the west shore.
Okay.
I didn't need to. I didn't have to. I just kind of got into. I always wanted to explore more. And I've just been impressed and amazed with the Muskie knowledge and exploration that's happened over the last 10 years out of all you guys and those that have been doing it, and the discovery of more places and locations. Honestly, a lot of that stuff that's happening on that West Shore now are things I thought or dreamed about, and just maybe tried once or twice here and there, on and off at times. And never. Those were like the locations that I could go to when I had people on the boat that already had their share or their benchmark or whatever it is that they already wanted to accomplish. And then I'd get those people to be like, take us somewhere different. I haven't taken anybody here yet. No, I haven't. Let's go. No, thank you. And now I think there's still probably some. I think there's probably even a better spot out there somewhere yet that no one's touched yet. It's like
Always.
That's the great thing. It's the beauty about this system and this fishery. The abundance, the opportunity, especially if you're a glutton for punishment. There's a lot of places to explore. I'm going to say it again. I sincerely believe within the next 5 years, something really mind-blowing, legitimately, is going to happen and come out of this fishery specifically. It's going to blow away all the benchmark, best stuff. Dare I even say, the controversy. Whether you want to call it controversy or not, whatever the standing current world record Muskie is, I believe there's a beater out there. I really do. Legitimate beater.
Cool beans.
I believe it's definitely a late fall season muskie at max weight. After as many meals as it could possibly eat. And that's the difference between a 45 pounder and a 50 pounder, or a 50 pounder and a 55 pounder. We caught one morning off a longtail. As soon as that rod clicker would go, I was hitting a waypoint. Because customers, whoever was in the boat for the day, they'd be on the rod. I was always about capturing where every rip came from, where every catch came from, and then where the bait fish were, where that little extra hump was, and we got a rip, and that was it. Before they even got to the rod, it was gone. And then we caught another one not far down from there, and for whatever reason, I was like, all right, let's do 180 and go back to that waypoint one more time. And sure enough, we came back on the rebound to that waypoint, same bait, same rod, hooked up this time. Wasn't the same fish. I'd like to say, yeah, it was the same fish because I marked the waypoint. And it was a 52-inch fish. It was fat. It was heavy. It was a big fish. Greg and Mary Prochaska. And Greg was the greatest husband. He's the greatest husband in the world. Today's all about Mary. He always let Mary catch everything. And when I went to get that fish out of the net, the thing that blew my, I was like, what is going on here? What am I looking at? And here, out of the fish's throat, was the tail of a whitefish, still hanging all the way out, onto its tongue yet. The entire tail and the tail meat, and the tail of that, that had to be a 24-inch whitefish that this thing swallowed. And it still hadn't completely digested it yet. It was still working on swallowing that, and it still ate, so it gets back, getting back to that, getting that encounter with, with a world-class record fish, you know, the ability to, you know, cross that rogue intersection, you know, where can they eat one more thing, you know, and the fish have that capacity out here. The biggest fish I ever had in my boat, I believe it was, I think it was the fall of 2011, 10 or 11. It was out here in University Bay, and unfortunately, I couldn't get that fish to release. It inhaled a shallow invader, and both hooks were all the way entirely down into one was into the gullet, and the other one was into the base of two of the gill rakers, and two of them got ripped out entirely. I managed to cut the hooks, got the bait out. I managed to even crazy glue the gill rakers back on, and they managed to hold for a release. It released. And Brett was actually out. Brett Alexander was out that day, and he called. He's like, "I think your fish is back up," because we had gotten halfway back down. So we turned around, tried to revive, you know, and over the course of a half hour, it just kept bleeding. It got paler and paler, and it died. And I can't remember who the biologist was at the time. I can't remember his name to save my life.
Dave Rowe.
Dave Rowe. I called Dave. I said, "Dave, I'm bringing one in. You want to come scan it with see if it's got a pit take?" So Dave met us here at the parking lot. We already called Joe Catani. And I was like, "Joe, you want to mold a fish?" He's like, "Yeah, absolutely." And that fish was 53 1/4, and on the DNR scale, it was 46 pounds and 10 ounces, I think. 9 ounces, a few, whatever ounces. It was shy of 47 pounds. But, you know, prior to that, I'll admit, you know, I couldn't tell you how many fish I would have said, "Oh man, that's a 50-pound fish." You know, none of those fish, you know, in hindsight, were even close to how big. You know, a 46-pound fish is a very big fish. You know, that's truly a fish of a lifetime. You know, and that, I can't remember what the girth was on it. I don't want to make anything up. It was fat, you know, that, I don't know how many people, you know, I'm sure some of you have had bigger fish than that in your hands. And if you haven't, you know, I think in average weight on a big healthy fish out here is probably about 35 pounds. You know, that's a big fish.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so from 35 to 45, you know, that 10 pounds is a lot. Imagine 10 pounds of hamburger piled up on the table in front of you right now. That's a lot of mass. In the fall, that's not necessarily body mass that a muskie is carrying. A lot of that, you know, what portion of that weight is actually what it hasn't digested yet. You know, which gets back to, you know, something big open, you know, and how much can a muskie hold in its belly? You know, and after having that hands-on experience with a 52-inch fish with an easy 24-inch whitefish, you know, and a whitefish isn't a sneaky fish. You know, that's got some profile to it. You know, from top of back to belly, that's a lot of real estate in a stomach cavity, in my opinion. So, you know, what can, you know, what and how much can they eat? I remember a buddy of mine through the Dan Johnson taxidermy. He had a bass fisherman bring a 46-inch muskie in off of Oconomowoc Lake that he caught on a little bass flickus, whatever they call them. And he was like, "I'm getting ready to cut this thing open. You got to come over here." He's like, "I want to know what you think is in this thing's belly," you know, because it was just, this was a 46-inch fish, you know, it's just, we're feeling, you know, like groping around on it a little bit, not in a non-sexual way, but I was like, "That's a bird. That's a bird species. That's two birds." And sure enough, he opened it up, and it was two mud hens, mud ducks,
Coots?
two of them.
Oh, wow.
Two of them, you know, undigested, fresh. You know, it's like, so that fish ate, you know, that fish ingested two adult birds, and was still looking for a snack. You know, just like that one with the giant. You know, so it, being on the time in the water, being in the right place, right time. You know, especially taking advantage of those, you know, that there's no substitute for that fall window, and they, because you think especially about big females in the fall, their egg sacs are fully developed. That's like early term pregnancy. They're hard as a rock yet. They're far, they have a long way to go to maturity for spring spawn. But it's not that they're just getting ready for a long winter's nap. It's a survival and a genetic endurance and assurance of reproduction. That even though they only get to do the deal, maybe a couple of times, that reproductive portion is a large portion to that, especially for the females with those, with their egg sacs fully developed. That they're taking advantage of those feeding opportunities, and the more you can find those refrigerators, keying on those refrigerators, you're one step closer to it. And a lot of times those are going to start having, keep in mind then, where did I see those big fish in the spring? Because that whole cycle comes back around. They begin keying in, and they start staging adjacent to those areas that they're going to be returned to and related to for next spring's fall. That whole cycle, your time on the water, just becomes your best teacher and your best lesson on even with the bay, on what part of the bay do I focus my energy and effort into, getting back to where do I start my season, and how many options you can cyclically actually kind of have. You can have multiple seasons within a season. The more you can thread that together. If that made any sense. How are we doing on time? Mike? Okay. Everyone good? I don't. I don't want to talk everybody's ear off. But I'm happy to keep talking and answer anything. Anybody have any other questions? Because I'll think of more stories. I have all of them. It's like that's the one thing about guiding. You do it long enough. And even some of the trolling explorations. I had some real gift clients in that sense. I had a gentleman and his wife that booked me 5 days a year, 5 days in a row. He loved cast, and because of health challenges, he just couldn't cast anymore. So we trolled, and he also everything was for his wife. I want her to catch everything. Let's try something new. Let's try something different today. And one day we're up. It was September. It was early September. We were trolling. We were trolling the ship channel up in Sturgeon Bay, and we got into the whatever you want to call it, the slot with all the retaining wall, where they cut through on the east end, up to where the Coast Guard station is. And once we got to that point there was a bunch of boats that were all trolling for brown trout, I think. And we ended up having to kind of go around them. We're cruising past them. I can't remember how fast I was going. I was going faster than typically ordinarily. I think we were doing maybe 4.5, 5 miles an hour. And all these salmon or chuck guys here, they're like, "You're going too fast." It was like, "We're not fishing, so we're fishing." Thank you. We're good. We get past all of them, and the wind that day was blowing out of the east hard up against that east shoreline. And the water in the channel was really calm. The water within the retaining wall by the lighthouse is really calm. And then once you got through that gap, it was just a mess. It was just like biblical, just crashing and thrashing. And there was just crystal clear blue water as deep as you could see, matted right up against the dirtiest, most churned up water that was inside inside that break wall. And as soon as the flatline lure hit from dirty to clean water, boom, it lit up just like that. We had a depth raider, there was a perch pattern depth raider. And he was fighting it. I'm trying to get shit out of the way. The wind is trying to blow us back into the wall. I'm trying to keep, it was just a mess. And we finally got it up there. It was a 38-inch brown trout. That thing fought like you wouldn't believe. They wanted to get a quick picture of it. And so we got the boat out just far enough, and just as we were, they're holding it up, taking the picture, all these guys that were trolling for the trout, they came around, and they're just like, their mind, you can tell, they're just like, the house of cards was just falling in their head. So then they all ended up turning around and going back in. And the best part of it was, by the time we finally got straightened out and set up, we went chugging back in at the same speed we were going. We never caught any of them. They must have all thought, oh man, we found it. We got the key to the city here. We got to be screaming through here. And then that same couple the next day, one of the funniest moments with them, it was colder and then it started to warm up. And I remember his wife had on a pair of long johns under her pants or whatever. And we set up and it's like, well, let's go down, we'll try down by Kidney Island. It's a little early for that bite, but we'll give it a shot. We're trolling along, and she had a little coffee can that she brought along to go, for potty. And she's like, okay, nobody turn around, I'm gonna be back here, I'm gonna go potty. I'm going potty, I'm taking these long underwear off, I'm getting too hot. So so she's back there, she gets something going potty, and now she's like, doing her thing, and sure enough, the rod right here just zing, zing, zing. She's like, no. And her husband's like, Dennis, get that rod. So I hop up and I give her the rod, and I shit you not, this poor lady, she's fighting the fight of her life with this muskie, and she's got nothing on from here down. And I hear this sound from over here, and her husband's over there with the 35 millimeter. She's like, oh my gosh, Ty, put something around you. And he's like, don't worry about it. Dennis has seen a vagina before. Jesus. So we get the fish in the net, and he's helping her tie a jacket around her waist to cover her up. And I give her the fish, and she turns around, we take a picture, and I've got my arm around her. Well, when he tied the jacket up, he tied it around her waist, but the jacket is still just like from here all the way around to here. Everything is still. Those are some of the. And then the next day we were up by Longtail, in whatever direction we were going. He was sitting like on the edge of the front deck, and she sat back down in the chair, and they're face to face. And she takes a coffee can, arms straight out of her side of the boat, and starts to go dump it into the water, and this big wind gust comes up. And it blows all her piss all over her husband's face. And he's just spitting, he's like, and as he's losing it, he was very sweet about it, a lot sweeter than I think anybody else would have been about it. Another rod goes off, I was like, I think from here on out, you need to be either urinating or half naked. It's like, and how do I write this? How do I get this published in Muskie Hunter magazine? So I know the guys are going to be like, honey, we're going fishing.
Oh, God.
All kinds of experiences like that out there, and those are the things I remember most, the sweetness of people, the goodness of people, people sharing their lives. And I can recall shedding tears with people as much as sharing laughter out there. It gets back to that community. And when the goal isn't being the best or getting the biggest, and really investing in that journey and collaboratively as a team in that boat. Not only is it fun, but that's where some of the most magical moments have really happened. Some of the best days in the water, as far as outcomes. Any other questions?
Okay.
One in the back here?
Go ahead.
So let's say your first day out on the bay, trolling through the year, and you just set up thinking, how are you approaching that? Are you approaching that running, trying different styles of bait, different sizes of bait? Before you have dialed in, like, hey, they want a perch super jet, what is your approach to taking that?
Approach to setting up a trolling pattern?
Like,
Or
when you're first, I guess when you haven't been trolling for a while, first time out, you don't know, quite what they want at this time of year yet. Are you trying some bigger baits, smaller baits? Are you focusing on colors? What's your approach at it?
I think even like when I had done some trolling, you know, more walleye trolling than anything. You know, my trolling experience was more walleye based and rooted before I fished muskies out here. You know, I did some muskie trolling because I had to. It was never my preferred tactic, but there were certain fisheries, you know, especially tournament settings on PMTT, where if you wanted a chance to be in the game and in the running, you better try trolling, because you can do it your way, and it's going to be a long car ride home with no money in your pocket. So, you know, even when I first started out here, everything in my mind, you know, and that was one of the things about this system that just really surprised me in the end, you know, was the majority of smaller size baits that actually were really productive from a trolling aspect, compared to what I would use up in Canada or in Minnesota, or even on some of the local lakes that worked. You know, 8 inches was typically the smallest bait I ever trolled prior to that. You know, and everything I started out with up here, you know, was on the bigger end of the spectrum. You know, with a very diminished outcome at first. You know, and you know, and then I was like, well, shoot, you know, some of the information people shared, you know, and then I went back to, you know, those small 6-inch crankbaits were what worked best, you know, in the river casting, you know, and it's like, okay, so started doing that. I think that if there's a definitive factor in there for a confidence or a gauge or a starting point, what's your forage base? You know, is it gizzard shad? Is it threadfin shad? Is it, you know, is it whitefish? You know, what's your perspective as far as, you know, profile or size? You know, because some of the areas, you know, and that was part of the reason why, like, we even downsized from some of the bigger baits too. You'd start going through big schools of bait fish, and then your baits aren't running right, and you pull it out, and there's 100 shad that big impaled on all the hooks. It's like, okay, maybe let's try getting back to just some of the things that you hear throughout your life as a fisherman. Match the hatch. You know, as far as colors go, you know, I still am more of a mindset and a believer more in water displacement. You know, you know, vibration, water displacement, especially the dirtier the water, you know, something that lateral line detection is going to be able to pick up from as far away as possible. You know, and I think the color has more to do with contrast and ability, maybe in that closing strike, especially in dirty water settings. You know, and then mixing and matching around there. You know, I've found where it didn't matter if it was like a fire tiger perch versus a natural perch. It was like there were days where anything with a perch pattern was working, regardless of the color. I was pulling out. I got to the point. You know, all my bait, you know, whatever baits were working, especially like the super shads, those things just get demolished. And all I had was white ones left. And I got the Sharpie out and drew perch pattern, you know, drew perch patterns on the side, and I'll be dipped. They lit those up, you know. So, you know, sometimes maybe it's not as much as the actual base color, but the actual contrast or the relation and correlation to the contrast that maybe the forages around. There's a lot of perch out there. So, you know, setting, and then going back to, you know, if you've been doing it for years, you know, start out with what you're, you know, go to what I always call the top shelf. What was your top shelf game last year? Use that as your starting point. You know, I always go to, you know, what's worked best in the past, and then even before I would start changing up shape sizes, if top shelf didn't seem to be getting it done, then the first 2 adjustments that I always do would be speed and depth. You know, a lot of times I think I got less results out of staying in a certain groove, because that's where all my waypoints were, and got, you know, bait happy, you know, by the end of the day that full of baits and nothing to show for it, versus keeping on those best producing baits and working with either adjusting and dialing the depth that they're running at, speeding up or slowing down, and typically my experience, with the exception of getting later into the fall, typically you kind of slow down a little more the colder the water gets. On tough days, I was sped up. Whatever my, 3.3 was my average trolling speed on a day-to-day basis, and that wasn't getting it done. I dedicate 3, 4, 5 passes to increments, up to 4, 4.5. The Wiley brothers, Wiley Baits, those guys are some of the best trolling geniuses I ever met in my life. And I don't think I've ever seen them troll any slower than 5 miles an hour. First time I saw them trolling on Cave Run, I thought they were afraid to get on plane. What are they doing? Just get on plane and be gone already, And my buddy's like, they're trolling. Trolling with the main motor, pushing so much wake, that the boat's damn near about to get up on plane. They're trolling 10, 11, 12 miles an hour sometimes. And if you think about, we get so locked into, what the right speed is. I read somewhere along the way, like a muskie can burst up to 35 miles an hour. And I can recall seeing it at times, where I cast up to a shoreline in clear water, with a topwater bait one morning, and I saw a flash, about 35 feet off to the side within the first foot of retrieval, and poof, that fish closed that gap like that. That's one flick of the tail. So I think sometimes, at least for me, one of the hang-ups that I would get into, or one of the pitfalls that I'd get into, is getting hung up on not having the willingness to vary and play around with those speeds more. And when I did, one of the most useful weed line trolling tactics that ever worked for me was just mainly out of desperation. Somebody had shared that they had done it. A local bait shop owner from Oconomowoc said how they used to troll suics. Troll suics? How do you troll a suic? Well, you just kind of, instead of cranking and reeling it in, you get the motor going and you just pump it along. It's like, okay, sounds all right, and due to a variety of uncontrollable circumstances, ended up at Lake Chautauqua with only 3 hours to pre-fish before the PMTT championship. Lake Chautauqua was a big lake. It one big flat and then one big bowl with a weed line. It's like, where do you even start? And I ended up flipping the locator up so I could, watch weeds on the locator, and I could even actually visually see the weed line. And I used my main motor, about 5.5 miles an hour, 30 feet back with a suic. I tucked the rod under my arm, put my hand on the steering wheel, and just started ripping along to see if we could locate something. After the third fish in 20 minutes, I was like, we're burning fish. I was like, holy shit, this works. So how did I get down that path? The speed, it gets back to, and I've done that, I used to do that on some of the weed lines on the west side, and especially on the stuff along the east side, especially on days, and again, it gets back to, you're out there day to day, you're moving fish, casting, you're seeing fish, you know where they are, but then when they seem to kind of start to shut down, that's where I've always found speed to be my best adversary for turning a pattern around, making that twist or that adjustment. And we used to speed troll suics on the weed edges, and that's where we caught a lot of muskies, and some of the big pike even came that way by doing that. So starting where you left off is always the best. I'm sorry, I'm all over the place. It's a really good question that I'm a really horrible answerer. But and then, and if anything, sticking with those confidence baits that have historically worked best. And first trying those depth adjustments, speed adjustments, and even depth adjustments in the sense of, you've got your cookie trails, from the passes you've made. Move over one trolling pass off of those cookie trails, and then even risk it all and move over one more. Because typically if they've moved, they don't go far. And it's a matter, and usually, especially with trolling out here, especially more in like the flats areas, everything in the southern end of the bay, on some of those tougher days, I've always found by the end of the day, we'd always pull a few fish up by making that adjustment 2 or 3 passes out deeper, or even tighter and shallower. Same baits, just it's sometimes the biggest adjustments are the smallest ones. Is there one other question?
I just had one other item. There are a lot of people in the room here that really don't fish out here quite a bit or don't have a lot of experience. Any nuggets for them, those folks just starting out in the bay, how to approach it, mindset, things like that?
Oh, God. Say goodbye to your family. Kidding. I'm not making light of anyone. How do you start out here? I would, this club's probably a best community and resource. Make friends with somebody in the club, and invite someone to come into your boat who knows what they're doing. That's always a good approach, because usually that person, if they're willing to kind of do that, they're usually going to be like, oh no, we'll take my boat. Don't be afraid to ask questions. There's no shame in asking questions. Anybody who's learned anything has learned it because they ask questions. That was one of my faults over the years. I'd rather go home and lick my wounds and feel like I need to figure this all out of myself before I be humble enough to ask somebody else how this what was successful for you today. There's no shame in that. Because I gladly share. Ask questions, learn. Hire a guide. Okay. Hire a guide. Yeah, definitely a great way to start out on new. I even in the later years as a guide, when I would go to Canada, I hired a guide for my first day up there. It's like I want that experience. I want, not that he's going to turn me into a master angler, but that guide on the local water up there knows what's going on a day-to-day basis, and it's going to really short track my learning curve and at least get me started, give me a starting point to build off of. YouTube, there's a lot of good stuff on YouTube nowadays, specific to a fishery. Articles, there's a lot of good articles, go to the seminars, talk to other people, and even go. Toki won't steer you wrong. go to the Muskie shop. Ask them what's working. Ask them to recommend a lure or two, or a location or two. Anything you can get from the knowledge base and the expert base for the fishery you're going to go out to, whether it's here or anywhere, is always going to shorten that learning curve. I see a lot of them I'm starting to drive people out now. So I'm going to bring it in for a landing, and I hope something was helpful or valuable to you tonight.
Absolutely.
It was sure great to be back home for a night and see all of you. I see a lot of really familiar and friendly faces. Thank you. And 2 of the hardest things I've ever done in my life. 1, start fishing Green Bay, and then 2 was walking away from it. I do miss it. It's one of the greatest experiences I've ever had in my life, and I'll always be grateful for it. So thanks for having me. And
Thank you.
You guys are
Thank you.
Thank you.